Okay, I'm really excited to kick off our keynote session with Dr. Robert Reid. Robert is the Hazel McCallion Research Chair in Learning Health Systems at the Institute for Better Health. If I mispronounce anything, thank you for your patience. He is also a Senior Vice President, Science at Trillium Health Partners. Robert is a global expert and thought leader in population health, learning health systems, and primary care. The session will be facilitated by our lovely Monica over here, and we will take your questions at the end of the presentations. So please do add your questions to the Hoover app. If we could welcome Robert and Monica to the stage. Thank you.
Well, nice to see you. Hello, BC. It's wonderful to be here, and wow, I can't believe the size of this conference. So you guys, and you're all here today to try to make our system better, to include patients, families, all of you. I couldn't be more encouraged. So let's get to work, because we got some problems in our system, but I'm absolutely confident that you can make a real difference on this. But before I start, I really wanted to say a big thank you to the Health Research BC. For many of you, you probably don't know that I was actually one of the original scholars from the Michael Smith Foundation many, many years ago, I think 2001. So it provided me, this province and Health Research BC provided me with a start early on in my career. And so part of what you're going to hear today is a legacy of all that generous contributions early on from me. And so I feel like I'm coming home. And I feel like I'm giving back a bit today. The idea of the learning health system has now been around, I think it was born about 18 years ago. So it just passed its adolescence and it's now into its young adulthood. And in the first few years, it was really a amorphous concept. It was trying to figure out its way. It was all concepts and ideas. And I was part of the original concepts and ideas and wrote some of the original papers back in the early 2000s. But we've matured significantly since that time. It's become a real practical tool to improve our systems and a practical approach adopted across the world and really now making substantial changes. I spent most of my career in the United States, came back to Ontario about 10 years ago to really see if we can make this approach come alive in Ontario. And I'll share you a little bit about my experience today as to what I think the promise is for this idea. And I couldn't be more encouraged to see all of you here ready to do the work that we need to do to improve healthcare in Canada. And I know that many of you are looking up at me because I was introduced as an expert. And I'll share today with you some of my expertise, but I don't see it that way. I look at you and I see the experts in the crowd. Every single one of you has expertise to bring in here. Our patients and our families and our community have their lived experience expertise. Our administrators, our managers, our leaders have the experience around their experience on how to run a system and how to make it operational. Our physicians, our nurses, our care providers have the experience day to day around caring for patients. And our researchers bring extraordinary scientific expertise in areas that are completely irrelevant to the day. And so I'm trying to figure out where here's the, sorry. So I want to think about your expertise today, how you're going to bring your expertise to life as we move in the journey forward. But we've got some work to do. This is the state of affairs in Canada, and I don't really want to particularly start on a depressing note, But it is really challenging. Have a look at those headlines that you have to just pull off any newspaper across Canada, including those in BC today, that tells you some of the problems that we have. Our current state, I think, is really fairly it was built for generally 40 or 50 years ago and has not been refined in major ways since that time. And we've outgrown it. We need to change. We need to evolve. It's undesirable and unsustainable. The care, and I'm sure that you can all have either experienced it or have relatives that have experienced it, is often fragmented and disorganized. Access, quality, and outcomes are not optimized. A workforce is stressed and often overlooked. One of the biggest problems is our equity gaps are not narrowing in Canada, they're widening. Those at the lower ends of the socioeconomic spectrum are becoming worse off, not better off. And then I think the biggest damning thing on this slide is that Canadians are increasingly frustrated and believe our system now isn't up to the task. They're becoming disenfranchised with the state of affairs. There used to be a time where Canada was really proud of its healthcare system. Very, very proud when I started my work. And now if you ask Canadians how prideful they are of their healthcare system, many of them would say it's fairly mediocre. And in the last few weeks, I mean, there's been the last few months, there's been a lot of political turmoil in the world, and you may not have noticed this, but the Commonwealth Fund, which is a major international body who's an expert global body that rates healthcare system, came out with their 2024 report on the state of affairs of healthcare in the world and rated healthcare systems across the world. And I've circled here where Canada falls, around 10 industrialized nations. We won't talk about the United States because they're at the bottom, and for a whole bunch of reasons. But look where Canada is. We're 7th out of 10 in terms of all these parameters, access, and so forth, and equity. Our system really isn't up to the task. And actually, we're falling behind internationally. Okay, so this is sometimes how I feel when I face these problems. As an individual researcher, individual leader in my institution in Ontario, I feel like I'm pulling my hair out and frustrated, and how do I change, and how do things improve the way it is? And I know many of you feel the same way. And what we're going to talk about today is a way to really change, and a way to not have to think that you're doing this by yourself, but working with others for the collective improvement of our system. This is a picture from Northern Ontario, and it's looking up at night. And sometimes looking up at night, you just see a dark black sky, and it can be really overwhelming and depressing. But then as you look further into the sky, you see the stars, and you see these twinkles and these bright lights that are there. And in healthcare, we have bright lights all over the place. We have bright lights all over the place. But they don't shine, they don't pervade, they're not given their due. And we don't learn from those bright spots around how we can spread those bright spots. So look at the bright spots here today, and you're going to see a bunch of them, and you're going to hear about them in your poster presentation today. Get inspired by them. Figure out how we can make those bright lights shine brighter and illuminate that sky. And I'm going to posit today that the way we go forward is we actually learn. Our system needs to learn. It needs to make mistakes. Victoria, where's Victoria? We need to make some mistakes. And we need to make we have to have some courage to move forward. And that's about learning. If you think about kids in school, it's not a straightforward path. They make mistakes, but they learn over and over. And that's what we need to do in healthcare. Our system actually has to learn. And it's a central challenge for us. Do we want the system we have now? Do we really want those problems? No. And I know, and I'm confident in this room, you can solve those problems. It's not undoable. You can absolutely solve what we're talking about today in British Columbia with the collective spirit in this room. Research plays an important role in here, but this is the way that we historically think about research in Canada and historically in the world, is we actually don't use research, patient-oriented research and so forth. We're actually learning. Often, here's the problem we have. Often the problems and the issues are actually poorly specified. We're actually asking not the right questions of our scientists and so forth. We actually aren't asking the questions that matter to patients or their families. So we misspecify the questions often. Right? So we're answering wrong questions with our research, or not significantly nuanced. Even when we produce, though, really ask the right questions, and we produce really good research, and many of the scientists in the room are producing extraordinarily good science, what comes out of it is we don't manage the insights terribly well. They go in journals, and they're buried. They're misinterpreted. No one really understands what the results and the interpretation of that is. So the insights are not well managed that come out of that research. And then even when the research insights are brought forward to decision makers into the health system, the evidence is actually fairly poorly applied. So it reaches some people, but not all people. And many groups are left behind. That research doesn't influence. And then finally, when that research actually is applied well, we actually don't learn from it. Every day in Ontario, we have people getting care. We don't learn from everyday experience as to exactly what's happening to them so that we can refine our approaches and move forward. So this is a slide from 2012, still as relevant then as it is today, that there's many opportunities, missed opportunities, and wastes and harm that result. And this is a quote from my former boss, Mike McGuinness: "The prevailing approach to generating evidence is inadequate today, is irrelevant tomorrow, given the pace and complexity of change." And I think that is still as true as when he wrote it years ago. And part of our problem is we're in silos. And just think about the silo you're in right now. What silos are you in? And in terms of your learning endeavors. Scientists, researchers often is done by scientists. Improvement efforts in our health system are done by QI specialists. Physicians, nurses, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and the like provide clinical care. Management is provided by administrators, and resource allocation is provided by policymakers that often don't talk to each other and don't have a common spirit around moving ahead. But even more than that, there's something missing here. And I think you know what it is. Citizens and communities' experiences care are often neglected, and we don't act on outcomes that matter most to our citizens and our communities. Okay? So that silo isn't even on the map often, and that's our challenge. Okay. So the learning health system, now I'm going to start picking up the audience a bit. I told you a bunch of depressing things, and now we're going to move to the future, okay? We're going to have some optimism. Is that good? And so we're now moving into the era of learning health systems and what we could actually do here. This is a diagram that our team created a few last year, and it's been very helpful for people to really understand what we're talking about learning health systems. Historically, research is done by researchers, often in universities, and they publish in journals, and They expect that this just to be automatically taken up and the system will improve. Okay? That's the historical trajectory. We know that doesn't work very well. It's haphazard in terms of it's taken up. It doesn't reach many people, and many people don't know about it. So that history has been a flaw. Okay? In the last probably 20 years in Canada and across the world, we've come into this new era of knowledge translation and exchange, which we're trying to bring those communities closer together. And actually, what I think of it is a brokering function. We're brokering the questions we asked with the scientists, and then we're brokering the outcomes after the science and try to help facilitate output. Learning health systems is just a natural evolution of this concept, where rather than these still separate, we're actually embedding research right in the day-to-day operations of health systems. So rather than distinct and separate enterprises, they're embedded in everyday work of our systems. So you can kind of think about it as an R&D function of our system. We're putting research right in the midst of how we're producing health in our communities. But I want to talk about that other word for a minute, about what we're talking about in terms of health systems. Because often people are vague in terms of what that really means. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of what I think a health system is. A system, it's an integrated suite of services. And just as I talk through this a little bit, just think about your current system in British Columbia. How well does it match with this? Okay? It divides an integrated suite of services: primary care, specialty care, hospital care, across sites and over time. These functions aren't independent, they're integrated. They're seamlessly integrated, so patients move between these in an integrated way. We organize and deliver services that are patient-centered, person-focused, not disease-focused. It's about people, it's not about their conditions. Right? So we'll think about that. We're accountable for defined populations, not just the people who walk in our doors, but the people who don't. All Canadians we're accountable for. And we often don't think about the people who we're missing. We think about the people who are there. And often the people who are missing will eventually come there to hospital emergencies and rooms. But we could absolutely work upstream to manage conditions before they ever reached hospitals. Just think about who's missing in the populations here. We address medical and non-medical determinants of health. And that means it's not just about health care, it's about health. So it's about partnerships with social services, housing, income assistance, transportation, things that affect their socioeconomic determinants of health, and it's around partnerships with these. It's prioritizing equity and Indigenous reconciliation. Top of mind, not an afterthought. And then finally, it's supported by an integrated suite of IT, financing, people, and back office supports. When I think of a health system, that's what I think of. Is that what we have in Canada? We're a little bit far from that vision. And so the learning health system is often, what we're doing is not just learning about how to improve the system, we're learning how to build the system. Okay? It's system building. Okay. You'll hear a lot of terms for learning health systems, and don't let these confuse you. They're all talking generally about the same thing, and there's a lot of words here. So you'll hear things like delivery system science, quality improvement research, real-world evidence, dissemination and implementation science. All of these generally refer to the same thing, and the core concept is using data derived from everyday life, everyday experience, for every day that BC residents receive care, derived from clinical practice, management of our system, to find the knowledge gaps with advanced research methods, to fill those knowledge gaps with methods very quickly, and then to feed immediately those results back to practice management and policy for change in rapid improvement cycles. Okay. And I like to talk about learning health systems as really quality improvement on steroids. And it's really now, it's building on the chassis that we've already established in health systems for quality improvement, the learning and improvement cycles we have now, but now integrating advanced research methods right into the midst, and using a variety of evidence sources to advance care. So it's an expansive view of quality improvement, and it's more than just improving local systems. It's actually being the bright lights in that sky so that you can show the way for other people, okay? So it's about external research as well, okay? Another point I just want to really make is learning health systems is about partnerships. It really is. That's what it's about. It's about trusting partnerships between researchers and care systems. But it's more than that. It's about bringing patients and families, their desires, their aspirations, their experiences right into the midst. And Maureen Smith, one of our patient partners in this work, just has described it as a stool, a three-legged stool with partnerships to crime. But she describes it as a wobbly stool. That the weakest leg on this stool is our relationships with patients, families, and communities, making sure that we're valuing their experiences, focusing on their priorities, and really their aspirations for our system. And I couldn't agree with her more. So work with us to stabilize that leg, to increase its strength, and actually for it to become the strongest, not the weakest leg. Learning health systems can operate at many different levels as well. Often we think about it at the individual, at the lowest level, which is the individual interaction between physicians and clinicians, so that the evidence that was produced yesterday in care can be used today. For the similar patient that's seen yesterday would understand what their results and experience was, so that would have benefit the similar patient that was seen today. Okay, aspiration. Clearly, we need to work at this next layer, which is how we organize, how we finance, how we deliver care at local levels, teams, units, hospitals, that meso level. And then we need learning at the more advanced, not the more advanced, but the higher levels, the regions, the policies, learning about financing, learning about how to regulate, learning about how to promote and sustain learning health systems to occur. And these learning levels need to be nested. You have to have the policies in place at the top level to allow that learning to occur at the lower levels. So for anybody in the audience, no matter what level you're working at here today, you can apply this thinking. Okay, so I've given you a lot of words. Now I'm going to make it a little bit more practical. Okay, so what was that all about? And so it seems like it's still all mushed up. This is my mushed up. So let's give it a little bit more detail. This is a framework that we developed in Ontario about 2 years ago. Is that right, Carrie? And it was really a way for us to become much more practical about how science is inserted into healthcare and the types of research that make improvements and how they interact. And this is what we call the Learning Health System engine. And the engine metaphor, this framework was developed with patient partners, with healthcare administrators, and with scientists. And the reason it's an engine is because that came from our patients. They said, we understand engines. We know how they work. Like, let's use an engine metaphor so it creates an understanding for us all. So that's where that came from. And you'll see at the engine, on this side is the products that we produce, better care experiences, better health, more stabilized workforce, Affordability. I mean, we have to create affordability. We can't run this country broke. So we have to have some financial conscience to this. But within that, those outcomes is embedded equity. And it's equity around all of those things. It's about equity in experiences. It's about equity in outcomes. It's about equity in workforce. And it's about equity in affordability. Okay? So equity is an overarching concept that needs to be front and center and not just an afterthought. The engine has a variety of fuels and accelerants. This engine doesn't run on its own. It needs to be primed, it needs to have fuels, and it needs to constantly have that infusion. And then it's got a bunch of brakes and moderators to keep it on track and in control. Okay? People will talk about them as barriers. I don't talk about them as barriers. I talk about them as necessary brakes in our system. Okay? And then finally, you'll see a bunch of gears in the middle, and these are the learning gears in the different colors. And these represent the different types of research and evidence that interact together with learning systems. Okay. So just briefly around these learning gears. The first one is all about, you'll see it's called Analytics and Population Insights. This is about advanced research methods around data, okay? Particularly around the new ways of using data, artificial intelligence, around advanced predictive analytics. Many of these researchers in the room, top-notch science, really relevant for today's work. But not only it's around data that we get from our data systems, it's also around data that we derive directly from patients and families, from their experiences. Clearly, we're not the only ones solving the problems in British Columbia. Everybody's having the same type of problems across the world. And so the second note is all around advanced evidence synthesis. Very rapid cycle, trying to understand what is happening across the world so we can learn from other people's experiences, okay? And using scientific methods to do that. The third gear at the middle is bringing these two sources of information together about our local problems around what's been worked before somewhere, other places, and is bringing right into the science of patient and family-centered co-design. And Carrie's going to talk a lot about that. It's bringing co-design right into the mix to solve our problems in our communities. Okay? Clearly, if we solve problems, it's not all just if we've got a new thing that we want to promote, it's co-designed. Part of the problem is how do you get it implemented? How do you get it so it reaches everywhere? How do you actually get it sustained? How do you change behaviors? This is all about implementation science. Okay? These are the science of implementation science has just exploded in the last 20 years. And then finally, it's about rapid cycle evaluation and feedback, feeding back things not in 5-year randomized controlled trials if we wait for 5 years, immediate feedback so that we can change the co-design if it's not working, and we can immediately change the implementation strategy. I don't know about you, but I've never seen an intervention work perfectly right out of the box, ever. It always fails in some respects. You always make mistakes. And so you have to really detect those mistakes early and change what you're doing. So it's really around rapid cycle change in this. And it's fine to make mistakes. It's expected. It's what we should be doing so that we can learn how to move forward. Okay. These are the fuel and accelerants. We won't go into them otherwise, but I just wanted to call attention to the learning networks. That's a clear fuel that we need. And this is about sharing those experiences across our own locales so that we can all learn from each other. Okay, we talked about equity. Now I'm going to give you an example, okay, about how we've tried to put this into place in Ontario. And this is a picture of my group, very much like your group here today, at a conference where we're sharing what we're doing locally. Okay? And you'll see on that stage, I won't call everybody's name, but you'll see a researcher, you'll see a patient partner, you'll see a healthcare administrator, or two. They're all there sharing those. It's the three legs of the stool. Okay? And this is the problem that they're trying to solve in our locale. And this is about seniors' care, really. And it's about how do we create a seamless system for seniors for where we are, and really try to avoid decline and avoid the admission to long-term care if it could be avoided, okay? And keep people in their homes. So that's what this problem was about. Okay? And because we're seeing increasing use of the emergency room for these people, and we're seeing increasing use of social admissions beyond medical care in our community. So this is the nature of the problem that we're solving. Carrie and her team, as well as our data analytics team, really used advanced research methods to really segment this population, to try to figure out who they are, what their problems are. They're not all the same. Because a one-size-fits-all approach is probably not going to work in this circumstance. And so using advanced research methods, Carrie and her team created personas that reflect real groups of people in our community, And you can see they're given names here about what their particular persona is like. Okay? And these are kind of the trajectory for these persona out there. And you'll see that one persona is a person who's actually doing pretty well at home, pretty stabilized, pretty socially supported, but is at risk for an event, like a fall. And that fall will actually likely result in long-term care admission, in 1 in 6 chance. Okay? That middle category is a person with a fair amount of complexity in their care, and they're pretty well teetering at home with a lot of social supports. And they'll need something different. And then this last person here, this last persona, is someone who is actually fairly advanced in their care, has a lot of complexity in their care, and is highly likely to end up in long-term care. Okay. This is one of the persona, just a story. I won't go through a sad story, but this is typical of a person like this in our locale. And so these are the problems this person has that we have to solve. So as part of a co-design event with patients, families, providers, researchers, Carrie's team, and others, came together to really redesign a care pathway for this segment of the population. Okay? And this was what the current state was, and the whole notion was, can we actually create an integrated seniors hub for this type of person who would not only have, deal with his issues, but caregiver issues, bring in social supports and so forth into this system, okay? This is the future state that is now being implemented in Trillium Health Partners in Mississauga as a result of that. So this is now in implementation stage. We're going to be evaluating to see how it reaches everybody like Assad. And I'll bet you we're going to redesign this again because there's going to be flaws in our thinking. Okay? So, just a couple more slides. It's exciting work. It's exciting work, and we know every one of you here today, I know, is absolutely wants to really participate in solving our problems. So there's a role for every single person. But I wanted to pull out a few tensions here in this work that I've discovered over the years that we actually have to manage very carefully. They don't go away. One is we've got to be clear on purpose, what we're doing, who we're doing it with, why we're doing it. This is about setting priorities. We can't learn everything at the same time. We have to actually make some choices. And we've got to have some reasons why we're doing it. So we've got to get clear what the purpose is, clear on the goals that we're trying to get to. And we have to actually be clear on the approach. Researchers often really want a lot of very well-established, very pure methods, but often those don't fit into health systems very well, and we need practical, fast cycle operational approaches. These are the other main tensions. We've got a big tension here around data, and I'm glad that the BC Health Data Platform is in place now to actually really try to solve this problem. We really have to spend time on ethical oversight, figure out how we actually ensure ethics of research and care, because we're doing it in a different way now than we ever have in the past. And then we really have to think about the role of technology, because technology will really has the potential, AI, new advanced technology, to really, really up our game. Okay, so 2 actions at the heart of the learning health system for you just to grab onto at the end of this to take home. One is to use learning and improvement cycles at all layers around tests of change, drawing on many forms of evidence, some of them that I talked about today, and really embedding research right in operations and in health systems. The next note is you can't let those improvements slip away. You have to actually make any change for the better the new normal. The new normal. We're going to continue to advance. We're not going to go backwards. Okay? So it's about making change for the better, the new normal, and not just another pilot project. We love pilot projects in Canada, with appropriate decision supports, governance, financial and care delivery arrangements, and with the culture and competencies for improvement. Okay? These are our big challenges, and so those are the take-home messages to what we need to do. So how do you start? And here's my recipe for to start, and Carrie might have different recipes. First is we actually have to form relationships. We actually don't have these relationships. We have silos. And it's really around developing trusting relationships with researchers and the existing system assets. Our QI groups, our patient advisory councils, our informatics and our performance measurement teams, we all have a role to play. So it's about creating relationships and linking them and embedding them. The second, it's about making sure that you know where your evidence sources are. Who are your tradespeople for providing these evidence? The data modelers, the behavioral scientists, the co-designers. And often we have to find a broker for that, or what we call, what John Lavis calls a general contractor, that can help bring all these different evidence producers together. Okay? You need to find the necessary fuels, but you don't have to find them all to begin with. You got to find enough of them to start, okay? And you build as you go, and you gain momentum. You build on the existing improvement and change priorities in your region or in your institutions, coming from patients and families. So you're not introducing often new things, you're building on existing things that can actually create some momentum. You use the learning gears and as a child learning to develop some competencies in these things. Competencies in data analytics, artificial intelligence, co-design, evidence synthesis, and so forth. And then finally, we build communities. And that's what we're doing here today. So if you want to learn more, there's a lot more material on learning health systems on the website here. I'll leave this for you. Back to the sky. Think about the stars. Think about where they are, making them brighter. And then you might have a nice picture. Okay? And that is my picture from my happy place in Northern Ontario. And that's what I want our health system to be, a lovely picture for everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, now I'm on the hot seat.
Now you're on the hot seat.
Oh my goodness.
Now you're on the hot seat. So before we turn up the heat, I'm going to just remind folks that we do have the Whova app, and this is something that you can, as was mentioned by Victoria, just reminding you, put in your questions as we go. The ones that are upvoted, the ones that have the most thumbs up, are going to be the ones that we will make time for today, because that represents common questions. So I'd like to ask Rob those common questions. So don't afraid to be spicy, because these are anonymized questions. And so with that, I'll get started. The other thing I will mention, sorry, I've got two phones today because I've got some technical difficulties, so we're going to play this really fun game where I need a third hand. So the one thing I do want to share with you is that I had a lovely chat with Rob yesterday about how he wanted to be introduced as part of this session. And what I really enjoyed about our conversation was it was less about the accolades and more about, that he holds this research chair named after Hazel McCallion. And I learned a lot about Hazel McCallion, who was mayor for Mississauga and who passed away last year at the age of 102. And what I thought was really quite something about that was that the research chair position that Rob holds is representative of an individual who is known for being such a community builder. And I thought that was quite something that we're really focusing on. Not Rob, but on Hazel McCallion, who was a tour de force, as far as I learned, quite a special lady, and in building communities, which just really works well for our conversation today. So just really wanted to share that with you.
Thanks, Monica. I mean, Hazel was a community service and an exceptional civil servant for her higher career. She always thought about the citizens in our community, and she worked relentlessly for improvement opportunities from transportation to health and so forth. So I'm very fortunate to hold the chair in her name. So first question. So this one's for me in reflection of your presentation, and thank you very much for sharing with us your thoughts and your expertise on learning health systems. One of the things that have struck me as I've learned about learning health systems as part of our work at the BC Support Unit was the LHS model is wonderful in that it provides this framework for decision making in terms of who do we have, who are we missing. It makes us really think about do we have all the things we need to move forward. However, when I read the model, I see that it points to an engine and gears and fuel and all these really mechanical sounding concepts. But really at the heart of it is relationships. So could you comment on the importance of relationships at the heart of this model, and how can we be deliberate in building time to do this hard work?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's probably not the model. It was the most important slide that I showed you today. It was that three-legged stool. And that reflects the relationships. And I couldn't be more agreeing on here. At the heart of learning health systems is collective leadership and building relationships in those three groups. We all have a part to play and an important role to play in that. We all have to trust each other. We all have to understand each other. We have to meet each other's needs and expectations, and we have to work together. And that is about establishing trust and establishing partnerships. And I couldn't be more agree with that statement. That is at the essence of how we have to move forward. And sometimes that's really challenging to do. There has been distrustful relationships in the past, or people don't know each other. And it's about being deliberate and really listening, open your minds, understanding what other people's priorities are to really advance.
Wonderful, thank you. So our first question from Huva is, how do you reconcile the need for rapid implementation within a learning health systems and the huge amount of time needed to work through clinical trials due to safety and efficacy, et cetera, which touches on, kind of relates to the previous question.
So it, there's many different types of research out there, and I don't want to certainly denigrate the exceptional research done in our institutions, in basic biomedical research, and in clinical trials and so forth. We need that research to invent and discover new ways of doing things, new drugs, devices, new mechanisms to deliver care. Absolutely. We need clinical trials to establish the safety and efficacy of those interventions, and they're very important to continue. But what we also need is to take those discoveries to be able to implement them so that they actually reach Canadians, reach the people who can benefit from those interventions. And that's where we come in. That's how we learn. Because what is often very sad is the people who could benefit from those things that we've discovered in Canada actually don't, because our system isn't organized to be able to deliver on an every time experience for people. That's where this comes in.
Fantastic, thank you. Pulling from the app, so what are your ideas or suggestions to accelerate the uptake of learning health systems in healthcare organizations?
Well, part of it is creating a movement. And that's part of what I'm doing here today, is to really help build allies and people who really want to do this and really move forward, so we can create a bit of a movement in Canada around how we can actually do this. So that's part of what I really am here today. And I think I've met some allies today around making this meaningful in British Columbia. We're seeing this idea take off in Quebec and in Alberta. I was just out in Newfoundland just listening to what they're doing, fantastic stuff, and we're trying to do our part in Ontario. So part of it is actually creating learning communities across Canada so that we can actually do this work. So please join me we're happy to have you continue to, everybody in the room, amplify these efforts and learn how to do this better and better.
Fantastic. So the other thing that struck me from your presentation was the root of moving forward and building learning communities and working in this way is, well, to me, it's courage and humility. You know, courage and humility to do different, courage and humility to go against the grain, courage and humility to believe that collective impact and not competition is the right path forward. Would I be right in that?
Yeah, you know, it is courage, because right now, often the system is set with some sort of equilibrium. We've got a status quo that kind of works for everybody, sort of, but less and less all the time. And Learning Health Systems is actually disrupting that and has the courage to do things in different ways and disrupt that equilibrium. And we need people courageous enough to take to say, like, we can do things differently here, and we can actually really advance it. And so courage is incredibly important, and every one of you, I think, has courage. These days, I think it's easier because the equilibrium is falling apart. We don't have the equilibrium we used to. And so I think you're more accepting of these days of doing things differently than we have in the past. The second thing is about humility. This is really humble work. And we all like to be experts. We all like to have the answers. And this is sort of saying, we don't all have the individual answers. We have to come together collectively to answer the answers. And we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. And we have to learn from those mistakes. And we have to be humble to understand those mistakes.
So the question that really is asking you to expand a little bit on that is again from our audience here. So learning health systems starts with well-defined problems. And here, again, you're emphasizing it's okay to make mistakes, but we have to catch them early. My question is, how can we incorporate strength-based thinking into learning health systems? What is the role of learning health systems in identifying, people have voted and things have moved. Don't change your mind when I'm in the...
Quick,
what is the role of learning health systems in identifying and spreading good and best practices?
Yeah, I honestly really like the strength-based approaches, and that was part of my metaphor with the stars. There is a lot of strengths here, and there's a lot of strengths in this room, and it is building on those strengths and not looking at all the problems, but looking at the strengths. So it is identifying the strengths that we can collectively have together. That's a really important question. Thank you for that one.
Fantastic, thank you.
So a couple of people that have some live questions.
We have live questions too.
We have live questions.
Is that okay,
that you're
Monica?
open
Okay,
to
let's do some live questions.
adapt. The improviser up here wants to take the live
Go for
questions.
It. Do it.
Please, sir.
I'll just sit back then. This is great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it's more of a comment.
Okay.
Most of our healthcare dollars are spent on chronic disease, most of which is preventable and reversible, and yet that's not a priority. The number one way we can do that is through nutrition, and our healthcare professionals often overlook nutrition's role in health outcomes, and it hasn't been highlighted today. And most people were having bacon and eggs. In a health crisis, an environmental crisis, like this is not the way to deal with the problems that we face. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I really do appreciate that comment. That's why we need systems thinking. That's why we need systems thinking. We actually need to get at the heart of the curve of people. So when we're talking about care, we're talking about prevention. We're talking about wellness. We are talking about acute care for people with chronic illness, because we knew many of them, we have a lot of chronic illness, but we're also talking about care for hospitalized patients, we're caring for complex patients, and we're caring for palliative care. So it is across the spectrum here, but you're entirely right. We want to move the needle upstream. We want to reflect more prevention so that we don't have the repercussions later on. It works for everybody. It works for patients, it works for our system, and you're absolutely right. There's a variety of components in that are important. Nutrition is one of them. Physical activity is also important. Emotional support is important. There's a variety of factors that have to be considered in this thing. So good on people. Think about what you're eating today. Let's move upstream and actually provide some preventive care practices.
Thank you so much. And we have a lady over here as well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm from the Northern Health Authority here in British Columbia. And I just wanted to pick up on your point around equity and thinking about northern and rural geographies and some of the unique challenges that we face. In our own context, where we're struggling to keep the doors open, we might have 40 or 50% vacancy rates in different departments. And I'm just wondering what your perspectives are on how we kind of grease those gears to make a learning health system work in those environments.
Yeah, this is such a really important point, and thank you for that question, because that is probably one of the most questions I get mostly across Canada, is how does this pertain and can be applied in places that are remote, that it's harder to do, they're less resourced, the spaces are greater, the problems are different. And it's an excellent question, because often we'll focus on where the populations are the greatest and not where often the problems are really special but important. I think in my perspective, we really have to actually listen to the problems in our northern and be able to actually address them. We have a responsibility for a place like me that's in Toronto or outside of Toronto, Mississauga, to not only to apply science that's not only relevant to where we are, but also to Northern Ontario, to the communities in the north that don't have the luxury of that. So we really actually have to think about how we make sure that we don't create inequities, because everything is central in large urban centers and not in the rural and remote areas. An excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, and we'll have the gentleman over here. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robert. My name is Sean Spina. I'm a pharmacist by training, so I'm very familiar with all of the talk about evidence-based medicine and the importance, and it takes time to get that into the healthcare system. I also lead in Victoria a patient-oriented research program with our Hospital at Home program. And I'll be presenting a little bit later about that. And we've had incredible work since 2019 with our patient partners. Incredibly, everything you talked about is very inspiring, and it's the right way of doing business. My question to you is, this group, by virtue of being here, is a very biased group that is engaged and wanting to incorporate these processes into the way we deliver healthcare. My question to you is, how do we reach the macro level, those outside of this room, those outside of this province, to instill this as a way of delivering healthcare in the country?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and part of that is that were my thoughts around creating a bit of a movement. Most people are dissatisfied, and none more challenged than many of our ministry officials and our government officials in our provinces around how to address the wait list, the hospital shortages that we have, the wait list that we have, the primary care shortages that we have. They're top of mind to that. And so it is a time where they're actually receptive to these ideas. I've met more receptivity from many people, but they're often don't know how to engage, don't know who their communities are, don't know the partnerships that they can be created. So part of it is creating a movement, creating relationships, building together for common spirit. My experience is those groups, particularly the people at the higher government levels, are terrific partners and really can kind of help unlock policies and procedures if they're reflected in the right way. The most important part of that, though, is to bring patients, families, and communities to the table. It's engaging local government officials, your members of parliament, your MLAs around the problems with this, and really creating that movement. So I really encourage you to make sure you don't not engage in the political process. The political process actually is really important to move this forward.
Thank you so much. We have to come to a little wrap up here, so we do appreciate you wanting to share your questions. If you can get them on that app, we will definitely make an effort to hear those questions and get an opportunity to speak to you or answer those outside of this session. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to give a huge thank you to Robert and Monica. We really did feel engaged, would you agree, in really learning about the health systems and framing ways to accelerate the work in BC.